Hi, everybody. This is Jennifer Harvey Sallin with I Heart Earth, and I'm here today with the Venerable Tenzin. So happy to be here with you. So thank you for joining me on this conversation.
Hello. Hi, Jennifer. Nice to meet you. Yeah.
As usual, I'm going to give a little bit of a background for how we came about to have this conversation, and I'm going to introduce your background, Tenzin. And then we'll do as we usually do in these climate engagement talks and explore where this takes us. And then at the end, you will share a meditation. You'll lead us in a meditation. So for everybody who's listening, you'll want to stay at least to the end and benefit from the meditation that Tenzin's going to lead us in. I wanted to start a little bit with a context, which is why it's a special honor for me to talk with you, and how the Buddhist philosophy has affected my life, and why a lot of what you're going to share about your journey and the philosophies that helped guide you in your process, why those are meaningful to me as well. So I left the corporate world in America when I was 27 and said goodbye to a lot of the ways of life that were considered normal and healthy in our, as sometimes people say, sick society. And I just couldn't understand how people could continue to live in a way that was so much on automatic pilot a lot of the time. And so I left and thought I need to find a better way. And right around when I was 26, I discovered Buddhist philosophy and non-dual philosophies in general. And I read a book by the Dalai Lama, which was about compassion. I think it was called The Compassionate Life or something like this. And I read for the first time that the purpose of life was to be happy. This was the Dalai Lama saying this, and I just thought, I'd never thought of it that way. I thought of it as like, I didn't really know, but the purpose of life around it seemed like, make more money and have a better job and all of those things, and just sort of pushing me in that direction. But I didn't really understand what it meant to be happy from the inside, like this enduring happiness. And so when I went to my first meditation retreat, which was a Buddhist meditation retreat, I saw people that I thought looked really actually happy for the first time in that I could remember, this kind of enduring happiness that didn't have to do with jobs or titles or things that in my world we associated happiness with or pleasure. And that really had a profound impact on me. And so I went deeper into the study of Buddhism and Buddhist philosophy and non-dual philosophies in general. And then I left about a year later. Then I left the US, I left my job, I left everything behind and just started to travel around. That's how I ended up living in Europe. And I just had to find a different way. And so there was this long period there where I seriously considered going into an ashram and, living out the next phase of my life in a deep state of meditation. And life circumstances made that difficult for me. And so I ended up finding a different path forward. But I have continued to kind of live in these two worlds where I'm doing worldly things and then the contemplative life at the same time. So it's made me a bit of a weirdo, but there's many reasons that I have felt like a weirdo in my life. So this just adds to that. But it's really nice for me to welcome you and to have, we've met before now, and have exchanged ideas, and I've learned about your story. And this is why it's so meaningful for me personally to have this conversation with you. And I think that for listeners who are maybe not so familiar with Buddhist philosophy or non-dual philosophy and are not familiar with a contemplative life or contemplative practice, it could be really eye-opening to listen to the things that you're going to share and to your story and how you got into activism. Like it's kind of a funny way, to be in the contemplative world and then kind of come back into the world and be in activism. And then for people who do know more about Buddhist philosophy and do practice meditation on, let's say, meditation in a sort of non-dual philosophy way, not just like meditation for mental wellness or something, but in a contemplative life practice. For those people, I think it will be reassuring to listen to you, and there will be a lot of common points that inspire them and motivate them and encourage them on their path. So again, thank you so much for joining me here. Okay, so by way of background in your life, you're a fellow Swiss, actually born and raised here, south of where I live in Engadine. And Engadine, yeah?
Yes, right. Yes.
Yeah. And so for those of you who don't know where that is, it's in the mountains in the south. It's gorgeous. It's on the border, kind of on the border with Italy, and it's just a beautiful, wonderful place. It's one of the vacation hotspots because it's so beautiful. So you grew up in nature, being in the mountains, you know, really connected with the environment. And you told me, you know, you really had this awareness of the environment from early on, and how the practices in the world were destroying, you know, big parts of the environment. And this was something that you were sensitive to right away. And the people around you were not so, most of the people around you were not so sensitive to it. So you were feeling a bit like a weirdo as well in your own way. And then you had this opportunity in your 20s to go traveling. And so you took on the life of adventure and went to the Himalayas and in Asia and traveled all around. And it's important to say, like, even back then you were doing all of this in slow travel mode, you know, so land travel. It wasn't like you said, okay, I'm just going to jet set all over the world with a bunch of airplanes. It was like really the slow travel mentality, and not wanting to like hurt the environment by the adventures that you were taking. And naturally, I think anybody who takes one of these big journeys knows that, you know, you're profoundly changed by these journeys. The people you meet, the different cultures, the different lifestyles that you see, they change your perception of what's possible and what matters, like why we live. And, you know, coming from Switzerland, one of the richest countries in the world where we have everything, going to a place like the Himalayas, you see totally different lives, totally different lifestyles. And something you said to me when we were talking about your story prior to this recorded conversation was that you could see this kind of contentedness and happiness in the people, even though they had so little materially speaking, and that it really profoundly affected you in terms of, you know, the kind of typical Swiss thing that we think of, like complaining about, I don't know, the traffic jams and the you know, these things that are kind of, well, we always say, you know, first world problems, and that it really struck you like we don't really have anything to complain about, yet we're complaining, and these people compared to us would have so much to complain about and they're not complaining, you know. So this kind of happiness that you saw, and that affected you a lot. And then it was during that time that you learned about Buddhism and began a practice of meditation. So I found your story really interesting because it was, again, slow. It was not like you discovered it on, you know, one day and then the next day you were totally in. You know, it took you some years. You went back to some monasteries. You did some study of Buddhist philosophy. You know, you were getting into it, but it wasn't like you just dropped your life immediately and then dove right in. And I think that's something that's important for people to hear, because I think especially in the West, like we think everything should happen like today. And I know as a psychologist, guiding people, that they oftentimes think that if they don't change overnight, that it's not worth trying. And I think one of the things that we'll talk about today within your story is that you try till you die. I mean, it doesn't end. There's not a point where you reach a moment and then you never have to work at anything again. Like you're always cultivating these qualities in your mind till the day you die. Even for somebody who, let's say, if we want to use the spiritual term enlightenment, even if somebody reaches that, they're still, after that, they're still cultivating. You know, it's still like, as the saying goes, chop wood, carry water. Yeah, I always get that mixed up. And it's this idea that, you know, you're still living every single day. You're still cultivating a mindset. It doesn't just, you know, it's not you just reach it and then you never have to think again and everything's wonderful. So yeah, it took you this time of kind of getting more deeply into it. And then there was a moment in your 30s, in your late, you were about 36, yeah, when you got ordained?
37, yes.
37. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was like going deep, more deeply, more deeply, more deeply. And then there was this moment that it was just a natural thing to take that next step into ordained life. So to officially become a monk.
Yeah.
And then you lived in India and in Asia for the next, what, 15 years or so, right?
No, about 10 years, but a
About
little
10
bit
years.
on and off, like with some breaks in between.
Yeah. Okay.
But almost 10 years altogether. Yeah. Yeah.
So mainly life in the East, not in
Yeah.
the West.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
And during that time, something you told me that was really meaningful was that you'd had all of these environmental concerns to up till that point, and you were, looking, okay, how can we fix it? What can we do? And you realized you weren't able to really make a big difference in the external world. So there was this feeling like, okay, I gotta see what I can do to heal what's inside, like my inner delusions about the world and about about reality, about what makes us happy and what we're doing here, what is the point of life. And so it was like this outer journey for you, and then you decided, okay, I'm going to do this inner journey and I'm going to heal what's inside first, and maybe somehow that will make a difference. So then that defines this kind of next period of your life, like healing the inner delusions. And then in 2016 you returned, like more officially, to the West, and that's where you are now, in the south of France. Yeah. The Nalanda monastery.
Right. Yeah.
And then it was in 2018 that you heard Greta's speech. So Greta's, for those of you who are listening, Greta Thunberg's first speech was at the UN plenary in Poland in 2018. And I mean, we've probably all heard it, at least seen it on social media or something, but it's where she says, like, you're stealing our children's future right in front of our face. Or you're stealing your children's future right in front of our face. And it was very emotional. And you told me that that was a really emotional moment for you, listening to that speech, realizing that these kids are, in a sense, helpless because the adults are not caring and are just continuing as if everything was fine. And so there was this feeling for you at that point that you thought, okay, I gotta do something more external again. And maybe now is the time. And also something you told me was that hearing her speak up was like, okay, finally somebody said it. Somebody said it out loud, because these were the thoughts you were having from being a teenager. So there's these three main phases that I see. I mean, if I have to oversimplify your your journey, which is, huge oversimplification, but there were these three main phases. The preordained life, where you were really searching for adventure and happiness and hoping that you could do something for the environment. Then there was, like, in an external way. Then there was the first part of your ordained life, which was more internal and like seeking to heal the delusions within. And then there's this next phase that's been opening up since 2016, since you've been back in the West, and that really kind of took on speed after 2018. And so since then, you've been giving talks on environmental questions within the Buddhist community. You've been active on social media, sharing information about climate change, biodiversity crisis, and all of these things, and using the gifts that you have and the resources you have and the community you have to speak out about all of these matters, and trying to raise awareness and help people understand how the Buddhist philosophy can guide us in working through our own inner delusions, and also then making external change where we have the power to do that. So with that introduction, I wanted to invite you to share with us. I kind of want to start at that moment of the beginning of your ordained life. So when you said, okay, I have to work from the inside out at this point, what was that process like for you? And what were the main realizations, a few of the main realizations that came out of that period? What were the things that, transformed you from the inside and that made you realize what is the dysfunction in the relationship with our world, and how can that be healed?
Mm. Yeah, thank you. So it's nice. Yeah, we have quite some things in common, and yeah, especially what you mentioned in the beginning, like being dissatisfied with how things work in our society and looking for meaning in life, and also looking for happiness. That, yeah, that was really something. And well, basically, yeah, during my ordained life, I tried to transform, because the problems which we face outside in society, they actually all come from our internal problems, on individuals and collectively. And the more powerful someone is, the more these problems manifest in the outer world. And yeah, somehow that was a way realizing that if I want to make a difference in the world, I really have to start with myself, like internally, like working on my own greed, desire, and dissatisfaction, and not being happy with this and that, and really cultivate some inner peace of mind. And then, yeah, from that on, like if I'm more happy myself, then naturally I will not harm others, and I will have a positive influence on others. And but yeah, that doesn't just happen overnight, as you mentioned. It's a long process, and it's an ongoing process, but I think it's the thing most worthwhile to do with our lives, because there, on myself, I can really make a difference, and in the outer world we can make a difference, definitely, but we have to have the right motivation, I think, and that again depends on our inner state of mind to have the right motivation. So yeah, and the Buddhist philosophy definitely gave me some answers in all those questions about. And as you said, the first thing was like realizing that happiness is not coming from outside. Like as a, yeah, when I grew up, of course, I what was clear to me was that I really want to be happy, and I just tried what society had to offer, like having as much pleasure and fun, and yeah, maybe material things was not that important for me, but still driving a motorcycle and having this and that, but then also realizing it's not really satisfying. And yeah, and then somehow meeting Buddhism, the main realization was that really I can cultivate happiness within. Like even external pleasures, they only are pleasurable if our mind is peaceful, and if we if you are with an angry mind, we cannot enjoy even a good meal or a company with some friends. So even to enjoy the good things of life, it depends on our internal state. And then also, yeah, if you want to make a difference in the world, that's yeah, that's the basis. So yeah, your question was how what was it? How I decided to use that to kind of being active in the outer world.
Yeah, well, I mean, before we get there, I want to focus a bit on these main realizations, because I think
Okay.
those are, like what you just said, is packed with a lot of power. And I think I think when people take on meditation generally, I mean, you probably remember this from the beginning, from the beginning of your journey with meditation, and then, Buddhist philosophy. A lot of times people think, oh, you're just like supposed to sit there and, I don't know, empty your mind of thoughts, and then you feel better, and then you go back to you go back to regular life. You're just better at regular life, whatever regular life was before. And a lot of people don't understand what they're trying to transform or what they're supposed to transform. And so some of the things you talked about, like greed, desire, dissatisfaction, happiness, peace of mind, these are things that I I mean, I remember with myself as well, like thinking, well, what really is greed? I didn't really have a clear understanding of what that was and why I would need to work with any greed that would show up in my mind, or craving or some of these other things. You didn't use the word craving, but that's one of the words that was often used um, in the Buddhist resources that I was, studying back at that time, like, working with this attachment and craving and these things that are happening in our minds. And we, again, I think something we'll probably talk about here is Charles Eisenstein's work, because that's something that's been a strong influence for you, or maybe not influence, but more like it speaks about how you see the world. And he talks about these stories, and the stories that we tell ourselves about who am I, what am I doing here, what is the point of being here, what is humanity for, what is the world for. And a lot of times when people go into meditation, they take their story, they bring their story, and then maybe they set their story aside just during the time that they're like emptying their mind of thoughts. But then is immediately after, like maybe they feel better, they feel, oh, I cleared my head, and then they go pick up their story and they keep living that same story. And what I was so attracted to in the Buddhist way of doing life and looking at life was the point is, you don't keep the same story. The story transforms itself. So when you come back, you see everything differently. So like when you said greed, I mean, you weren't a person that even really cared that much about external stuff. You didn't care about having the best of whatever. I mean, yeah, you were traveling, but so you liked adventure, but you didn't care to have the huge house and lots of cars and I don't know, whatever somebody could say is, material success. Yet you identified greed. And so that's really interesting. It makes one think, well, what is greed then? If you didn't have much of a taste for the external stuff, what was greed in you? Or desire? What was that? And so there's this kind of process that we go through of figuring out how are we defining these things, and how do they relate to the story that we brought into the meditation, or that we brought into the reflection or the contemplation. So I'm curious, for just like kind of starting there, like how did you find these things in yourself, the greed, the desire, the dissatisfaction, and like, I mean, you can answer both at the same time if you want, or we can separate out, but I'm curious what you would say to people who are hearing you say that and going, yeah, but I don't know how to find those things in myself. I don't even know what I'm looking for.
Yeah, right. So yeah, it's true. Like I remember one of the teachings in Kopan Monastery, they were talking about anger, and I was how a negative emotion anger is, and I was thinking like, oh yeah, I wish my father would have heard this teaching. So we can easily see anger in other people, but then at some point I was thinking like, well, maybe this teaching is for me. It's because I didn't felt like I'm angry, because we're just overwhelmed by emotions, and they take control without us even noticing it, if we're not looking inward. And we become angry, and then we act out of anger, and we think like, oh well, that's normal, because the circumstances, we have to get angry if this and this happen, or like wanting things, desiring for even small things, or desiring for having just pleasure or things. It's also a form of desire, and we especially pleasure, we don't see it as negative at all, and it's kind of nice. But then when you meditate or start to meditate, you look more inward, and you try to see these emotions in your own mind, and see them arising. And I mean, sometimes we notice when we're really angry, not, oh, now I got angry. But when we're just a little bit angry, just like some little bit dissatisfaction and a bad mood, which carries throughout the day, we're somehow not so aware of it. But still, it has an effect on our interaction with others and everything. And we don't feel happy. And if we, during meditation, and especially if it's during a longer period, like a retreat where sometimes you stay in silence, so you don't talk, and it's, in the beginning I didn't like it because all these emotions come up, all these negative emotions, and then you're confronted with it and you cannot just act it out, so you have to sit with it, and you see how unpleasant anger is, and even desire. Like if you desire for something, like you meditate and it's hot and you desire to be somewhere else at a cool beach having an ice cream, then it's not pleasant because you're there meditating, but you want something else. So your mind is not where it is. Like you want something else, which is unpleasant. And yeah, and to start to understand how even desire is something which is not very pleasant to have. It's much more pleasant to be happy with what I have. And a desire is only, it gives us some short pleasure. We have desire and then we fulfill the desire. Then we actually go to the beach and have an ice cream or whatever we desire. And then, it feels so great. But actually what feels great is only because the desire stops when we fulfill it. But then it's just the next thing coming, and it's an ongoing thing. So we're constantly trying to fulfill our desire, and as soon as we have it, then it's the next thing coming, and on and on and on, and it's never ending. And yeah, with meditation you learn, like, instead of following your desire or your anger, you just watch it and you accept it and you see it as unpleasant, and you kind of let it go, or you can even actually transform it. Like anger, you can, like in Tibetan Buddhism, they always talk about the antidotes. Like the antidote to anger is love. And it's like, it's very profound explanations how, for example, like we get angry at, usually we get angry at unpleasant things, or a person, like a person, we get angry which does something which we don't like, and then we have this negative view on that person. Oh, he did that to me, and then we get angry. But it's not actually the person, it's just how I see the person, and I have this negative view. And if we love someone, then sometimes our view completely changes. We see qualities. Whether the person has these qualities or not is a different thing. When we fall in love, the person looks so amazing, so beautiful and wonderful, and it looks so real. But then if the person does something different and doesn't make us happy anymore, suddenly we don't see those qualities anymore. So it's a lot of projection, actually. And it takes time, but after a while we can see a little bit through these projections. Like whenever something appears attractive, then the attractiveness is not so much from the object, it's something we project on that object. And the person may be very attractive in the beginning, but then we get to know the person better and we see some little faults, and then suddenly we don't see this attractiveness anymore. And same with anger. So if we have a negative view on something, we can actively try to find something positive about that person. For example, like if I get angry, sometimes these days I mainly get angry at politicians. When I see what they decide, what they do, but it's not really useful to be angry. But then I can think like, okay, that person made some decisions which are bad for the environment and causing suffering on the planet, but still that person may be a loving father to his children, which I don't know. I just see the things which I don't like, and then we can kind of balance that if we want.
Yeah.
So there's many tools we can use.
Yeah, I think what you're sharing like points to this emotional intelligence that is cultivated in this kind of, this kind of looking for the healing the inner delusions. And I know this, of course, from the world of psychology. In order to heal anything in the mind, let's say, mind body's connected, I know, or it's the same, but whatever. I'm just going to say mind just to simplify.
Yeah.
That in order to heal anything, there you have to have the emotional awareness of how you're feeling, and then of course then it is really connected to the body because we feel our emotions obviously in the body. And so a lot of people that I've worked with over the years, they want to heal without feeling those emotions, or really being aware of what they are and seeing all of the nuances. And something that I will share, from my personal story, and it's something I've seen a lot, is that for people who grew up with trauma or who are in like abusive situations, sometimes this whole process of trying to make sense of their emotional reality is really difficult. And so you have like basic needs for safety, and then sometimes these, like, I know when I started meditating and started up, finding my own inner desire and inner anger and these kinds of things, I was like kind of telling myself, okay, I want this person to change. Let's say a person who's being emotionally abusive to me. I want this person to change, but maybe it's not my right to ask them to change. And so I got like this confusion between just accepting whatever, like accepting bad behavior and not meeting my own needs for safety, and this idea of desire. So I know a lot of people who get into Buddhism, or in any case meditation, or working with emotional intelligence this way, they can get these matters quite confused. And I think it's important to point that out. If you're in a monastery, for example, you're less likely to be in emotionally abusive situations, or to be in active trauma. But for people who are in those in emotionally abusive situations, or physically abusive, or any kind of abuse, and in with past or current trauma, then it can be really difficult to say, okay, here's how you get emotional awareness. You just feel your emotions and then you let go, because the people will still keep doing bad things to you. And so it's like you can't get rid of that anger, because that anger is actually your self-preservation. Like that's your survival self that's saying, protect yourself, So there's like these different ways of working with it, where if you feel that anger and then you have the antidote, which is love, if you feel that self-love, you will protect yourself. And so there's the different ways of working with these things, that as you get more into a safe space, like as you have your healthy boundaries and you get into a safe space, which I think happens through the antidotes, so like you used the anger and love, and it's a really powerful one. It was one that helped me a lot. Like, it's more about my love for myself than my anger against that person for their behavior. I protect myself because of my love for myself, and I mean love for the rest too, but I'm protecting myself specifically. And so like having that was really helpful to understand that I did desire safety, but it's not like an unhealthy desire. It's just a basic like human right, or I think is a basic human right. And so there's still some sort of action and transmutation to be in that's involved. But sometimes people think, well, it's enough that I was aware of my emotions and then I just let them go. And it's like, no, you have the emotion, you transmute it through these antidotes, and then you act on that higher emotion, and sometimes, a lot of times, we find that when you transmute that emotion through the antidote, then the situation sort of resolves itself somehow
Mm.
without you having to go take, great action on the outside, which is, I think, what you're pointing to, like, which is why you said, I'm going to work on the inner side so that I can do something, so that it has an effect on the outside. And oftentimes that is how we see these shifts. It's like once we get that inner emotional awareness, we're able to transmute it, then the outside does start to change.
Yeah, maybe I like to add, like, as you say, often people think they need the anger to protect themselves. But if you really think about, I can protect myself without anger. If I'm not angry, it doesn't mean I let everyone do whatever they want to me. I can still set my boundaries and say, like, wait a minute, I don't like that. And I can say, like, no, please don't do that to me, without getting angry. And we can be even very firm. And it's the same like with activism. Like sometimes people think, oh, but you have to get angry, otherwise you'll never get active. But sometimes people, or often, get active out of anger, but then the outcome is not always the best. And we can get active out of a sense of injustice, a sense of care and love and so on. And I think that's a much better base to get active than out of anger. And I think also like Gandhi, for example, with his movement for freedom in India, I wrote his autobiography, and he was really working a lot on himself, and he was not angry at the British. He just said, like, this is our country, and he just wanted the country to be free. And that's actually why all the Indians, they really trusted him, because he didn't have like his own agenda. He didn't want to become the president and whatever. And he really had this pure motivation, and also this, yeah, the whole movement was peaceful because he didn't have this anger in himself,
Yeah.
and he had a lot of reasons to be angry. And I think that's a good thing, that anger is not the best motivation, but we need to be active, but we can motivate ourselves in a more positive way and get active out of a motivation of love and caring, compassion and justice, or like positive things.
I think that's the power of doing this inner process,
Yeah.
because if like you said, you heard the teaching on anger and you thought about your dad, but then you realized, in contemplating, you realized, hey, I have some of my own as well. And it's only when we take the time to sit and be aware of what is inside us that we can start to transmute that. And I think when we see a lot of people around that are kind of living, again, to oversimplify, kind of living their life on the level of anger, kind of irritated with everything, frustrated with everything, having a little rage attack, here and there. And maybe there's moments of calm and happiness, but there's this kind of underlying current of anger. A lot of times they're just not even aware of it. And I know this, I've had clients come into, to therapy or coaching with me, and they're saying, why is nothing changing for me? And so I'll say, are you aware that you're this angry? And say, what, me? I'm not angry. I just want to get things done or something. And so then, I have to, if they're not into meditation, then I have to find other ways to help them to reflect. So for some people, meditation is like they feel allergic to it. And so I will help them to find another way to process those feelings. So whether it's writing, whether it's through art, whether it's through physical expression or something, we'll get creative and find ways for them to get in touch with the anger, so that they can then start to work toward moving that up. Like, I work with something called now I'm going to forget the name of it, the map of consciousness, which is from a spiritual teacher, Dr. David Hawkins.
Yeah,
Are you
very,
familiar?
yeah. I think it was also developed in connection with this mind and life talks with His Holiness Dalai Lama.
Okay. Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah,
Yeah,
but I
yeah.
know
I
he
think
was
there was some
involved with
connection.
Buddhism as well.
Yeah,
Huh.
yeah. Mm.
Yeah.
Really amazing work. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's for me, it's been like my life map, as I've gone through,
Yeah.
because he works with it, for those who are listening or aren't familiar, it's a scale that goes from shame at the bottom all the way to what he called enlightenment, which is kind of a non-duality or emergent way of living. And then in between, I'm looking at the scale now, that's why I'm looking up. In between, there's all of these, emotions that go up in energy. So shame is like this process of elimination, humiliation. Like, I don't want to, basically, I don't want this part of me that I'm ashamed of. I don't even want it to exist. And then it starts to go up. There's guilt, there's apathy, there's anger, there's pride, and then, gets to courage, and that's when you start to have these life affirming emotions. So what Dr. Hawkins said, again for the listeners, is that the lower emotions are life destructive emotions if they're not transmuted into, if they don't serve their function of transmuting into higher emotions. So anger is a first impulse. It's a normal impulse. We have it in our instinct, so it's a normal impulse. And then if it doesn't get transmuted to a higher emotion, like courage, neutrality, reason, love, peace, and so on, then it ends up sort of destroying us somehow, and destroying the world around us. That it needs to end up being transmuted. And so that's that work where it's like, okay, you have to be aware of these, let's say, negative impulses that you're having. I mean, I don't want to call them negative because they're instincts. So it's not like it's wrong to be angry, but I would say then it becomes wrong to just stay angry and to never seek to, do something with, like, use that anger to then transmute, get up to courage, and then getting up to love. Or if you don't want to go up to love, at least go up to reason, where you're like, rationally interacting, as opposed to just from a place of pure anger. And again, I always sort of make the caveat that there are times where, like, anger is just as a quick impulse, it will save your life. I don't know if you see somebody hitting a child, and you get quick flash of anger and you go, pull the child away. Okay, then maybe that saves the child. Or if you're getting angry because somebody's chasing you, you're going to run really fast and save yourself. Maybe you get away, So in that one moment, okay, that's good. But then as a chronic, if you just keep feeling anger about all the little inconveniences or people or whatever, it will end up becoming destructive. And this is, as you point out, this is something that I see constantly in the activism community with burnout. People will say, well, how are you not burning out, doing the activism work you do? And I'm like, well, for me, it comes from the pure emotion of love. Like, I love life. I love the earth. I love the beings on the earth. It's like if I had kids, yeah, sometimes it's tiring. Sometimes I do feel sad, and sometimes I do feel more negative emotions, but they come from love, And so if that doesn't run out, like, I have this, and it feels anyway inside my head that I have this endless supply of this, profound, this really deep love that's like, of course I'm going to wake up and do this because I love life. So why would I do it otherwise? Whereas and there have been many things that I've tried to do out of anger, and then I have burnt out.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and also, like, it's only when I started dealing with my own anger that the relationship with my father has changed.
Yeah.
And I know I cannot change another person, but I can change my attitude, and that really makes a difference. So that's one way. And also another thing about meditation, if we're more mindful, we can even see anger when anger is about to arise, like when we have a conversation, and sometimes the conversation goes in the wrong direction, and then things start to get heated. Before I get angry, I can see, like, if we continue this conversation, it will not lead anywhere, and then maybe just change the subject to something different, and that's it. While in the past, I would just have continued, and anger would come. Same with desire. The more I think about some desirable object, the more I want to have it. And if it's not something I really need, then I'd rather stop thinking about it and think about something more useful. So yeah, with mindfulness, we can transform these emotions, because before they even become strong, once they're strong, they can be overwhelming. But with mindfulness, we can see when the mind is going in a maybe unskillful direction, and then, or it's just a place where we're not so happy, and then we, like that, we can learn to keep our mind more at peace, or just having a more positive attitude towards whenever something goes wrong, just see it in a positive way. And it's something we can train. Like, it's not that we are born optimistically. Some people might have more or less optimism, but we can cultivate. When we miss the train, we can think like, okay, now I have time to drink a coffee for an hour and do nothing, or think about something, and take the next train instead of getting angry. And yeah, traveling helps with this kind of things, like situations where things don't go the way you want, especially in India. And then after, if you don't learn to relax and take things as they are, you drive yourself crazy.
Yeah, you will totally burn out. That's an important point. And even to take that further, what you were saying about, like, when you're aware, when you cultivate this awareness, you can start to feel when you're becoming angry, and then you can make a different choice, right, as opposed to just not knowing you're becoming angry, and then, the reaction, which causes suffering for yourself and for everybody around you. But as this links to the boundaries question that I was saying before, the more you cultivate awareness of your emotions, the more you can change even before you would get into a situation which would make you angry. So it reminds me kind of the whole, like, loss of rituals in our lives. Like, there was kind of this, there's been like seasons and rituals, and this idea of that you cultivate a situation so that you will have a certain, like, ease or peace in that situation. And I feel like with our 24/7 connected world, a lot of times I see that people have lost that concept of, like, how you're saying, if the train is late, well, then you have a coffee, and then everything just changes, and that's fine, because you use that time as sort of ritualistic for preparing for the next thing. And a lot of times people are like, no, because I was, like, supposed to be at the thing, and I don't have any time to, like, adjust. And when you are really, when you're cultivating this emotional awareness, you start to see what you need even before things start to happen. So, like, if you cultivate the emotional awareness before, you can plan that when you're going on your trip, wherever you're going, or whether you're just going to work or whatever, you can plan ahead, you can know ahead that you have things to keep your mind occupied if things don't go as they plan, as they are. So you keep yourself from having these kind of, I don't want to say irrational, but these kind of blow-ups of anger when things don't go your way, because you planned ahead of time that, sometimes things don't go your way, and so it's going to be okay if things don't go your way. But a lot of times I when I'm working with people, I just can see that there's not this space ahead of time for planning that things might not go as they plan. And as that relates also to just our relationships with people, it's like, if you don't cultivate that self-love ahead of time, you get you end up getting yourself in relationships where there is abuse, or there is, there are dysfunctional dynamics, even if they're not abusive per se, and where you have, your boundaries are being broken and stuff. And then in that moment, of course, you're going to be angry, because how could you not? But if you cultivate self-love first, then you're less likely to accept even you're no, even to put it better, you're more likely to actively be finding people in your life that are nourishing for you, and that would never think to break your boundaries, because why would they do that? Because they're nourishing people, because they mirror back that self-love. But that takes that cultivation. And because of what, like I said about the stories, we come into, if we start a contemplative practice, we come into it with our stories, our pre-existing stories, which were, given to us by our cultures and families and stuff. If we don't take that time to figure out what stories we're bringing in to our relationships, and we don't have that ritual that says, okay, I review what I have, and I throw things away that aren't fitting anymore, and I change and I transform those things, then we end up in these kind of repeat situations, getting angry each time, or whatever the thing is, feeling greedy, feeling like, unreasonable desire, and all of this kind of angst. And then it's hard work. That's how you burn out. Like we're saying, you burn out when you just keep seeing anger every time and nothing is really changing. You didn't transform it before. You don't have any sort of ritual space to deal with what's coming up.
Yeah. And I think often people just don't have the space. They're so stressful job and relationship and family and all the problems of the world from the news and all these things. And sometimes it's just too much. And I think for me, having been traveling for years in Asia, just with a backpack and a few things, and okay, I saved some money in Switzerland and I had the luxury to not to have to worry about money in India, where everything is relatively cheap. But I had this leisure and could just do nothing and just hang out with people and go to places and really think about, what am I doing? What do I want in life? What is the meaning of life? And without any pressure, and having this space is really a great luxury. And the same thing as a monk in a monastery, like there's no pressure of work and things. It's more like you're learning about the spiritual aspects, all these tools, like this map of the mind you mentioned, that there's a similar thing which we study here in our studies about the mind and the mental factors and so on. And then you connect it with yourself, and you have the space to explore these things and to talk to people about, well, how is this? I don't understand that. And you discuss, and then you meditate, you internalize, and you see how it works. And to have this space is more and more rare in the world. And because our lives are just so busy, and the problems are so overwhelming, which we are facing nowadays, and a world which is constantly changing. And I can really see how this can be overwhelming. And then people just don't have the space to deal with their own emotions and being actually in contact with themselves. And then so that's one of the fundamental practice problems, as well as all the information we get nowadays with all our devices constantly. It's just too much for our mind to deal with somehow.
Yeah, and it makes me think, as you're talking about that, I'm just thinking about how, for me, kind of living with my feet in both worlds, the contemplative life and the active outer life. Like, I'm not in an ashram. I didn't decide to go that route, or life didn't present me the real opportunity to go that route. I'll put it that way. It's strange to feel, like I said at the beginning, feeling like a weirdo. It's strange to feel that that this is the weird path. Like, I think people, in addition to what you're saying about being overwhelmed, I think it's scary for people to get space and have space, because when you start to become emotionally aware, it's hard to communicate with people who are not emotionally aware. The communication becomes strange and strained a lot of times. If you're out in the world and people are expecting you to be not thinking about these things, and not like I'm coming from a place of love. I'm talking about that when in the actions I do in my regular circles. That's pretty weird. It's like, that's nice. That's nice for that other thing, but that's not real. And so I think there's this difficulty, not only just because of the quantity of stuff, everywhere. I mean, even I'm just thinking about like the quantity of like buildings and concrete and noise and machines. Like, it's so hard to even just go out in nature and find a quiet space without hearing human machines. I mean, I'm in Switzerland, so that's especially true here. Like even when we're in the mountains, it's, there's machines around, we can hear them usually. But so there's that aspect, but there's also this kind of socially unacceptable or socially strange aspect. Like, if you start to cultivate these emotions and you start to cultivate this emotional awareness, and you start to think more about these things, I mean, it can be quite difficult. And I know that's true on the psychological side. So people who I've worked with, clients I've worked with, they usually have a moment in their process where they're like, okay, I can't, if my social surrounding doesn't also get more emotionally aware, I don't know how I can continue to keep this level of relationship with them. And it's not a judgment necessarily against the other people. It's just like, becomes really difficult. So then they find themselves in this awkward transition period where they don't have a new social reality yet. And they also don't oftentimes want to leave their old social reality, because it's their family, it's their friends, it's people that they care about and that they want to continue to relate to, but they struggle. And so in addition to the overwhelm, I think that a lot of people just struggle socially, knowing where they would fit if they became more emotionally aware. And I've seen people who have started the process and then kind of given it up because their social surroundings are just like not supportive of it, or just so neutral about it, like that they just don't acknowledge it, and they don't engage with it at all, that the person feels like, okay, this part of me is invisible and it's too painful to do that.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you're in a community like you are of people who are cultivating these things, then that's completely normal. But I think for those of us who are trying to do the contemplative life while living in the outside world, again, it's not that simple, but I think that's an extra struggle on the path. I don't have answers for it. It's frustrating, but I think it's something that either people feel called to do, whatever the cost, or or it's just not worth it, and then they'll avoid it.
Yes, I think the surrounding makes a big difference, but also sometimes if we go a certain journey, then somehow naturally we will meet people who after time, or people will notice some change and will become interested as well.
That does happen. Yeah. Okay, so I would love if you would kind of tell us a bit about how you, and I'm going to kind of get more technical on the Buddhist philosophy, but for people who are listening, maybe you know about the Four Noble Truths and you're familiar with it and you've practiced with it. For some people who are listening, they're going to say, what are those noble truths that you're talking about? So for the people who already know about it, I'd like for you to just share how you see the Four Noble Truths as useful in thinking about our relationship with the environment and how we do activism. And then for those who don't know anything about it, maybe you can just quickly say what the Four Noble Truths are.
Okay, yeah. So, yeah, maybe to start with, basically, maybe why actually I choose to become more active again with environment is that I felt, even when there was talk about the Paris Agreement and things like this, which is amazing. I was so happy when that finally happened. But somehow I felt the discussions don't really go to the source of the problem. Like we see, okay, humans are destroying the planet, we should burn less fossil fuels. And yes, of course. But then why are we doing this? Why are we burning fossil fuels? Why so much? Why is this overconsumption? And yeah, and I was trying to find answer for this my whole life, but a long time. But then Buddhism actually provided some answers. Like, it's all in our mind. It's basically the Buddha taught about the cause of all our suffering is greed, aversion, and ignorance as the three root delusions. And I was thinking, like, this is exactly what's the cause of the problem, the environmental problems as well. It's not just the cause of my personal suffering and problems, but it's also in the world, why we fight wars, why we cut down the Amazon forest, why we pollute the oceans. It's because, yeah, first of all, our greed. We always want more and more. We are not content with what we have. Even here in the West, where we have a quite comfortable lifestyle, it's never enough. And then there's like a fear of losing out on comfort, on pleasure, on material things. Even people who are actually, yeah, they have an idea, yeah, we should protect the environment and so on, but oh no, we cannot do this, we cannot do that, because it will put our lifestyle in danger. And this fear is even among people who are actually in favor of protecting the environment, but not if they themselves would have to give up on some comfort or pleasure. And that's one of the problems, and fear and aversion. And then the basis of all is our, what the Buddha called ignorance, which is just wrong views. We don't see things as they are. We miss out on, intellectually we might understand that our life depends on the life supporting ecological systems, but we haven't really understood how crucial that is. On maybe on an emotional level, we don't know. That's why we still treat it so lightly. So yeah, that as a basis, or something which I felt like this knowledge is very crucial if we really want to make a change, a fundamental change, which, and not just having new technologies which might save a little bit, but it's definitely not enough to save the planet, and we don't have the time either. So we really need some drastic changes, and changes always have to start in the mind. Like every revolution started with a change of mind. And even I used to work as a carpenter. If I want to build something, I have an idea and I have a plan in my mind, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do like that. And then eventually I can do the action, and I can build whatever I imagined. And it's the same with the environmental problems. We have to have a change of mind, an idea, and then work on it. But the change has to start in our mind. And yeah, I gave a few talks in the Buddhist center, and because it was a Buddhist center, I used the Four Noble Truths, which are the fundamental, actually the first teachings of the Buddha. And the first of four noble truths is the truth of suffering, which means if there in the Buddha's thought was about our personal suffering, like we're suffering, we're dissatisfied, and we have to realize our suffering, and then out of that we will want to change. And the same with the environment, with climate change and all the other problems like the drought we have right now in Europe. It's disastrous, and we have to see the suffering and not just think, oh, it's not enough water, we should need more water for irrigation or find some technical solutions, and not just the suffering of humans, to see how much animals are suffering, and especially with the forest fires we have, and the whole thing, like the deforestation in other parts of the world, and in the ocean, all the animals dying and so on, to all these man-made problems, and to see the suffering, and not just to see it intellectually, but actually really look at the suffering and feel the suffering. And that was something, when I heard Greta's speech, it touched me on an emotional level. I could see how the young generation, they're actually suffering because they're the fear of the future, which our generation, we messed it up. And to really see the suffering, and then being motivated by compassion, actually, because compassion is the wish for others to be free of suffering. That's a Buddhist definition of compassion. And when we see suffering, we can either be overwhelmed by suffering, which is very unpleasant, and we freak out, but we can see suffering and really look at the suffering without being afraid of it, and let ourselves be transformed by it and generate compassion for those who are suffering, including ourselves, and then really have this compassion and say, okay, there's all this suffering going on in the world, and then we feel we should do something, and then the Buddha, he taught the second noble truth, which is the cause of suffering. So if you want to eliminate the suffering in the world caused by climate change and other human activities, we need to see, okay, what's the cause of suffering? And we can see there's many causes, different levels of causes, like, as I said, burning fossil fuels creates climate change, and that causes suffering. But then we can go deeper. Why do we burn so much fossil fuels? Why do we need more and more things? Why can't we live a simple lifestyle, having just enough food and clothes and shelter and peaceful interaction with others? Why do we need all this stuff? Because we are not satisfied. There's something missing. But all this consumption is not actually providing what we really lack. What we lack is maybe security, is empathy, is feeling of connection, and so on. And then the advertisement tells us, oh, you buy this, you buy that, and then you will feel good. But it's a lie. And we have to see that, yeah, what's the real cause of the suffering. And then the real cause, again, is coming from our mind, our greed, wanting more, not being satisfied, our fear of losing something, our aversion of those who don't give us what we want, and ultimately our wrong views, like the view of that consumption may bring us happiness, that material comfort is bringing happiness, and ever more material wealth, and our whole economic system, which is based on growth, which is completely crazy. Just the idea to have infinite growth on a finite planet with finite resources, it just doesn't make sense. So there are all these wrong views, these stories which we believe in, which are even obviously not working.
Yeah.
But we just haven't really find the courage to change them for a better story, to think in a more positive way, have a positive vision, and being more connected with nature instead of disconnected. And so so the causes are in our mind, our attitude, the way we see things. And then the third noble truth is the cessation of suffering. So the Buddha taught about suffering, the cause of suffering, and then also see that it can be changed. It's not that the suffering is just happening without a cause, or just happening, especially climate change, it's caused by humans. So if the cause of suffering is done by us, we can also undo it. So it can be, and we can see like nature can regenerate, and we can do regenerative agriculture, and there's a lot of things we can do. First, stop the destruction, and then also do something to cultivate something positive, finding new economic systems, which and not just greenwashing, like real changes. And then the fourth noble truth is the path leading to cessation of suffering. So that, again, the Buddha taught it on a personal level for individuals, how to get out of their own personal suffering through a path of meditation, of moral conduct, mental discipline, and finally wisdom, like to really see what's leading to happiness and what's leading to suffering, and giving up those things which are leading to suffering, even if it might look like happiness. But this is our delusion, that we do things which that promise to make us happy, but actually they just create a lot of problems and suffering. And to really have the wisdom to see what is really leading to happiness, not just for myself, but for all sentient beings and nature as a total. So that's a short, quick overview.
Yeah.
I hope it's not too overwhelming.
No, it's great, and it's very powerful. I think, a lot of times people think of the Buddhist path as like, or the contemplative path, let's say, it's just like very, inner focused only. And it's true, but it's like two sides of the same coin. Because it does allow you to see then how are the collective is a mirror in a sense of the individual, and you can see, like the way that you're describing, it's like you can see even just with the noble truths which normally apply to the personal path, how it's true on the collective path, that it, there is suffering, we can see it, and we can see that the roots of suffering really come from this. I mean, they come from the collective of individuals who are having this greed and the fear and the aversion, and so it makes total sense. And I think it's hopeful to hear it framed that way, because it a lot of the ways that people talk about this thing is it an individual issue, or is it like an out there issue? Is it the politicians, or is it us, or is it like the big corporations that are the big polluters, or is it us individuals? And I sometimes, when people say this, I feel like it's going to break my brain, because I think, how can you artificially separate this? It's of course our internal thing, and it's of course the external thing. It's both. How could you think that it's one or the other? And so I think it's a really clear way when you apply it like you do, the Four Noble Truths, to this kind of inner but also outer view. It's really helpful for people to connect the dots and say, it's an interbeing issue, as the Thich Nhat Hanh word so eloquently describes. It's an interbeing issue. It's the individual and our mind being with the collective mind, and the results of of that. Like every single individual does make a difference in the collective mind. And the collective mind makes a difference toward the individual as well. And it's why there's like a shared responsibility between the individual and the collective in the matter. And it's why we can make change. Something we talked about and you had written about as well in some of the things that you wrote, and I'm going to link, by the way, in the end, I'm going to link a couple of talks that you've given on these matters, and so in the show notes, in the description of our video here, I will link some of the talks that you've given publicly, and also the some of what you've written, so that people can get more information about your story and hear more of your teachings on the matter. But one of the things that you talked about that I thought was also really helpful in terms of framing was about the Noble Eightfold Path, and how the elements on the Noble Eightfold Path are really helpful for us, because one of the things that I found so helpful in the Buddhist philosophy and teachings was this kind of secular ethics guide, like these frameworks for secular ethics that were really powerful and based on, for me, how I experienced the world anyway. Like, I don't know, I think I was born without some sort of normal filter where people see themselves as separate, because I never could, I even as a kid, I never experienced that. I couldn't understand that. I am definitely what they would call an empath, somebody who really has that deep empathy. I actually have a form of synesthesia that's called mirror touch synesthesia. So if anybody that's listening is intrigued by that, you might want to go look it up. But it's like when something happens to somebody else, I feel it as though it happens to me. So I never got the sense that I was separate from anybody else. And so obviously that favored well for me with Buddhist philosophy, because it's really this interdependence, interbeing. And then within that, this question of like, how do you be an ethical human being? How do you act ethically? What are the guidelines? And I had grown up super religious. Anybody who's heard my past knows. My dad was a minister in the Baptist church, and I rejected that doctrine and left. But in my early 20s, I was kind of floating around. Like I didn't want those guidelines, but I still needed some guidelines. I needed some kind of ethical framework to help organize my mind and my actions. And so the Eightfold Path is so powerful for that, because it's like, it gives us these ways of, when I talk about the emotional intelligence, for example, it gives us a way of understanding what we do with the emotions once we're feeling them, and when we're transmuting them, what are we aiming for? So for those of you who don't know the Noble Eightfold Path, I will read the 8 things for you so you understand. And then, Tenzin, I would love if you share some of your thoughts on how we can engage with the elements on the Eightfold Path as it relates to the environment. So it's having a right view, a right intention, right action, right speech, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right meditation. Yeah. So when you're working with environmental questions, how does this Eightfold Path help you to sort of organize your own way of engaging? And when you're teaching on this matter, how does it help you to guide students?
Well, first of all, I think it's mainly something to guide me, like personally, and I think from there it naturally also evolves. Like yeah, it gives a frame of, let's say, when we make decisions in life, usually we make decisions out of desire or aversion, or if not, then often because we have some conduct or some framework ready, like we think this is good, this is bad, and then we don't have to think, oh, do I do this or that? It's just wrong. Like in Switzerland, you grow up and your parents teach you that it's wrong to throw garbage on the road or anywhere in nature. So it's just wrong, and you grow up with it, and that's just like a conduct you learn. And other conducts we might have to adapt, like or sometimes, of course, if it's taught by our parents, we often kind of reject it, but later we can see, like let's say, right speech, to be honest with your speech. It helps, people will trust you, for example, in the long run. And right action is like not to do any action which is harming others, which also in a deeper way, like there's like, yeah, not harming others means, for example, not killing animals or not causing harm to animals. And that, for me, it in like in a monastery, like when there's ants on the floor, the monks, they try not to step on them. It's like we try to be mindful. Sometimes we put little signs, oh, watch out, there's ants crossing, and then we step over it. And that's kind of just nice to see people care even about ants and or other little animals, and even mosquitoes, which are quite bothering, but still we let them live. Well, maybe chase them away, but not to kill them. But then for me, that's like something I think I can take further whenever I go shopping. And then it's the question in the shop, do I buy the cheaper product or the one which is a bit more expensive but is produced in more ethical or fair or ecological way? And then I can see sometimes my greed. Oh, it's really, why is it so expensive? I'm okay to pay a little bit more, but it's really too much. But then I can feel, oh, it's not that I cannot afford it if something costs €5 instead of €3. Just €2 I can afford, but there's kind of some resistance, and this is just my greed. I want to hold on to my money, and then I can check my motivation. Why would I buy the more expensive product? Most often, I think people buy like organic food because it's more healthy. It's more healthy for me. So that's, again, it's kind of an egoistic motivation. Still good to do. It's because it's important to stay healthy. But the motivation, but you could also buy it because it creates less suffering while being produced, less use of chemicals and fertilizers, not destroying the living beings on the land, and so on. So every action, and then sometimes we can just build up a framework what's right and wrong to do, and also other people can be inspiring. Like usually, I mean, when I was young, you wouldn't even think about flying from Switzerland to Paris or to London because that was just too expensive. Only businessmen would do that. You would take the train. But nowadays, it's cheaper to fly than to take the train. And sometimes people, why do you take the train? It's much more comfortable by plane. Yeah, it is. But I'll pay more for the train. It takes more time and all that, but I do it because it feels right, because it's less CO2, less destruction on the planet, and if you see other people doing that, then it can be an inspiration, and that's also kind of ethic. We can say like, okay, if I go to India, I will not go overland every time, but in Europe, I can just take the train. It can be a decision I make. It can be my personal ethics for the environment, and yeah, right livelihood to live live simple and honest, for example. And also there, to expand a bit further, I was thinking, like, we have all these things we feel we need, but actually most of the things we have we want. So somebody said once, it's important to see the difference between my needs and my wants. So our needs are actually very few. We need food and drink, some clothes, shelter, a house or something, and some social contacts, and that's basically it. Maybe some medicine when we're sick, and all the rest is more want. I want this, I want that, but we are not satisfied when our basic needs are covered. And yeah, there would also be like right livelihood, to live without taking more than your share on this planet. Like I feel, just by, even if I live simple here in Europe, just with all the things which are provided by the government, and all the things we have already uses so much resources, that even if personally I don't buy excessive things, just living in with all these resources we have is almost too much. While in other parts of the world, especially if you traveled a bit, or if you see how the majority of people are actually living, yeah. Yeah, and in the end, this all comes down to cultivating right mindfulness, right concentration, meditation, to cultivate the right view or the right understanding, which basically makes the shift we need.
Yeah, which points back to this need for space.
Yes.
Because I think for somebody who doesn't have the time or space to reflect on these things, they just act without really going through it. Because when you think, I mean, the view is how you see things, the intention is how you desire things to be, or how you like intend for things to be. The action is the physical thing that you do. The speech is the way that you connect with other people about it. You know, there's all these different ways. I could go on down the list. Like you said, the mindfulness is about the mind. The effort is about the heart. And there's these. It's a sort of full way that you can evaluate what you're doing, and whether what you're doing is in line with the things that you care most about and your highest values, and your, let's say, goals in interacting with the world, or your own ethic in interacting with the world. And yet, if you don't have the space to reflect on those things, maybe you are living in the way that feels right for you just by chance. But most people, I don't think most people do. And as you're saying, yeah, and when you're in a context that doesn't really allow you to live within your own ethic because of the cultural one around you, then it even takes more reflection, and I would say more creativity for how you can live in the best way with your own ethic, than like within the context that you're in, because you can't just rely on the context that you're around to guide you to do the things that feel the best for you. And I think there's a lot of people that struggle a lot with that dissonance. You know, what the context makes them do, and what they would do if the context was different, and how can they like live that out. And I mean, we all need the space to be able to contemplate those things. Otherwise, we just end up doing what the context says we do, and then we're a little bit robotic, and not in touch with our own intention, and not in touch with our own power. So I will link to the description of the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path for everybody who's listening, so that they can, maybe print it out and reflect on it on their own time. Okay, so coming back, I want to we'll need to close soon so we can be guided in the meditation that you've prepared. But coming back to then the second question that we said toward the beginning of our discussion, which was how all of this sort of mind preparation allowed you or prepared you well for coming out and doing more activist work. I think in general, the way that we've discussed, it's probably pretty clear, but I wonder if you have any last thoughts that you want to share on that. How you feel stronger or how you feel more prepared for coming out and doing activism work based on everything that you've cultivated over these last years.
Yeah, like in the beginning, like early part of my life, it was quite frustrating. Like I was a bit of engaged, but also, yeah, there was not, it was kind of frustrating. And yeah, maybe also I didn't really know where to do and what, but yeah, anyway, then being in the monastery, living a simple, honest life, which was always something I aspired to actually somehow. Then I was kind of cut off a little bit from the news and the world, and just living in the monastery, cultivating my own inner like positive states of mind, let's say, and working with my own inner delusions. And then being back in Europe, of course, here in the monastery, yeah, we do have internet, and there's not so much news, but you can choose to if you want. And I felt, as you say, like we need this space to cultivate our inner attitudes, positive attitudes. It really needs some space. And if you're too much influenced by all the bad news from the world, it can become such a distraction. And so it's important to have that space. And yeah, but then of course, especially like here in so-called Mahayana Buddhism, there's always this emphasis, we're doing all this work on ourselves for the benefit of all sentient beings. It's not just for me to be more happy. So in the end, it's even being in the monastery, cultivating your own positive states of mind and all that. In the end, the goal is to have something to share with the world. And I always felt like, oh, I'm not ready. I don't know much and so on. But I think we always have that somehow. We never reach the point of saying like, oh, now I know it and now I'm going out and share. But it was also some of my teachers, they encouraged me, oh, at some point it's good to start teaching. And I mean, about Buddhism. But then, yeah, as I mentioned, the environmental problems, they became just more and more urgent, and I also felt like there's no time to wait. Something has to happen, and there was a little bit more talk about climate change and things than in the past, even though it was nothing new. I mean, even 30, 40 years ago, it was well known already. But it became a little bit more public and so on. And yeah, then having the Greta Thunberg speech and then the movement of the young people, it really, there was actually a movement. And I think it's what you mentioned before, like we want to do something, but we feel we're the only ones. And the whole, even talking about climate change, sometimes it felt like it's something certain people believe in, and others are like, oh, I don't believe in climate change. And this luckily is not so much anymore, but not so long ago, it was something people thought like something you choose to believe or not. And now it's more accepted that it's a reality. And I think that's also thanks to the the young people who really went out demonstrating and saying like, no, we want this to stop, and really went, and it was a movement. And then that movement really gave me some encouragement. It was really, really uplifting. And I thought like, yeah, I want to kind of support that movement and do something what I can. And also, as I mentioned before, I could see that in some ways the real causes of the destruction of the nature and the planet is not really addressed. And I thought like, maybe that's something I can contribute to those groups who are already active, to go a little bit deeper on the internal level, to really change the way we see things, because that's really the fundament for change. And then it came kind of natural also to, and I'm still not really sure where to address these things. It was more kind of in Buddhist circles, where I thought like, because some Buddhists, they're more not so much engaged really in environment. I mean, they care for, and they like normal, but not super active. And I thought like, it's especially for us as Buddhists or here in the monastery, we should be an example of not just caring for the ants on the ground, but also what we consume and what we buy, and how we do things. And there's a growing awareness also here in the monastery, I can see. And also outside, I think there is more and more people who really see, like, try to see the whole picture. And it's nice to kind of try to contribute something to that.
Well, it highlights a lot of what we were talking about along the way, just sort of a different angle, which is, as you do this inner reflection, you start to see you start to see in the collective where action is already happening, and you can connect. And it's not, I think sometimes people think that they're just waiting for the movement where they have the perfect fit, and they can, like, as if there was a job description written for them. We're looking for a person who has these qualifications, and then come join our movement. And it's never like that. It's like you do some inner reflection, then you find a little bit of a connection with a movement or other people who are thinking about these things or doing something, and you connect on that little awareness that you have, and then that feeds back into your own inner reflections, and then you make progress, again, more progress in your inner reflections, and then that connects you even more to the outside, and that inner reflection feeds the outside, which then feeds you back. And it really is this positive cycle, or virtuous circle, as sometimes it's called. And I think once a person starts, then they start to experience that flow. But as long as they're stuck and saying, well, I don't know where to go, I don't know what to do, I don't know, it's like, just start reflecting a little bit. You'll find uncomfortable emotions, but there are ways to deal with them, and there's support for dealing with them, whether that's just by talking to one friend who actually cares about these things and is willing to listen, or whether that's going to therapy, with somebody who understands the climate situation, the environmental situation, or like there's a lot of climate circles now. There are a lot of, like, there's the Good Grief Network. There's all kinds of climate psychology things now that are out there, resources, books, and things that are, there to help people to deal with whatever difficult emotions come up with regard to the climate, And then you just do that, and then you find, oh, there's a few out there, and then that feeds back in, and it keeps growing, and the path starts to, excuse me, I have a bug in front of my face. Speaking of ants, speaking of bugs, then that kind of energy grows within you. And again, it is an interbeing process. It's not you alone and you're going to fix it all by yourself. You know, I'm speaking to the listeners here. I mean, I know that you know this, but it's not any one of us that's going to be the one sole person who fixes everything. And it's also not everybody out there who's going to fix everything. It's us with everybody. So yeah, I think it's a really powerful and inspirational example how you've walked your path and where you're at right now and the possibilities that are opening up for you. I mean, who knows who's going to listen to your talk here, our talk here, and reach out, and how this is going to touch, you know, people, and then how that's going to reverberate for you again, once again, feeding into your process. So yeah, for those of you who are listening and are encouraged and inspired by Tenzin's path up till now and what he's doing, well, let us know. Reach out, and you know, we'll find a way to keep giving you opportunities to share your knowledge and, you know, share your experience. Very powerful stuff. I know I felt in preparing this talk with you and having the recorded talk now, I feel very, you know, honored and happy to have spent this time with you.
Yeah, it was an honor for me too. Like sometimes we feel, yeah, there's not much we do, but just being there and being ready and accepting change, I think it's already something. And it's more than just doing like a little bit of recycling and thinking, oh, I'm recycling and oh, I'm doing so much. But just, I think also even just mentally welcoming change and being part of ready to give up on my comfort a little bit, or paying a little bit more without fear of losing. I think that's already something, even if we're not out there really demonstrating and changing things. I think, yeah.
Okay.
Internally, yeah, being ready for change and positive changes, whatever.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned that, like being in the state of readiness. That is also what we cultivate, because sometimes we're cultivating the positive feelings. We're working through the I'll say powerful feelings, and sometimes we're working through the more, you know, destructive emotions, and we're expecting things to be different outside right now, and sometimes it takes time. You know, we're ready for the outside to be different, and it's not different yet. And that's Charles Eisenstein. He talks about this time between stories, the space between stories. And a lot of times we're like, okay, we have a different story, we're ready to go. And we're in that transition phase. And it's okay to just sit and be ready. Kind of like how you're talking about, you know, if the train isn't there yet, you just have a coffee and stay ready, because the train will arrive and there will come an opportunity to plug in and to do something different, you know, to live out a new story. But it might not, you know, come right in this exact moment. So it's also about cultivating patience, I guess. I wouldn't claim I'm the best person with patience, but I do work to cultivate it. Sometimes I think about it more as space than patience, and that helps me. Because when I think about patience, I think, you know, calm yourself down. And when I think about space, I think, you know, just open yourself up to the situation as it is. You have plenty of space, plenty of time, you know, then I'm not trying to hold back my impatience, you know. Okay, so how about we go into the meditation that you've prepared for us?
Okay, yes. So maybe, yeah. So then we start with just taking a comfortable posture, sitting a little bit upright and relaxing the body. Maybe take a few deep breaths. Just breathe normally. Feel connected with your body. Just arrive within you. And then this meditation is about connecting with nature. And of course, it's best to actually spend time in nature and connect with it. But if you're at home, like now, you can also cultivate a deep sense of appreciation for all forms of life just by imagination. So this can actually be a very powerful meditation. So with having a peaceful mind, breathing naturally, and being here and now, we now can imagine we're sitting on a small hill in the grass in nature. We're overlooking a beautiful landscape. Maybe some lush green forests below us, birds and animals, mountains around, lakes and rivers. Just imagine such a place. And you can also try to remember a situation of awe and wonder. Maybe a situation when you have spent time in nature. Maybe remembering a beautiful sunset, or the stars at night, or just feeling the beauty of nature by walking in the forest or watching wild animals. Or even just walking barefoot in the fresh grass, feeling the touch of the earth under your feet. So now just spend some time dwelling in that moment, allowing those feelings of love and wonder pervade your awareness. So if we are in touch with the beauty of nature like this, a feeling of appreciation and love naturally arises in our mind. So this is love. Try to feel the love for nature, the love for others, and feel how it is expanding your own self to include all the others. Feel this spacious mind. So normally we're mostly concerned about ourselves, but with love, our mind is expanding to include the others. We are no longer separate from others. especially when we see the others as beautiful and kind. So let that feeling of love pervade your mind. Let that feeling expand to all forms of life. Let it include all the trees, the plants, animals, even rivers and mountains, and the whole of Mother Earth, including humans. Feel that you're not separate from nature. You're one with the whole earth. Think how wonderful it is to be living on this beautiful planet. And from this universal sense of love, naturally the wish to protect all life from harm and suffering arises. So then just slowly end your meditation with these positive thoughts. You can relax, open your eyes, and then to end with, we can think, if we connect with nature and cultivate love and compassion and a sense of belonging, we will naturally want to protect our beautiful blue planet Earth, including ourselves too. And we can end with a wish that all beings may have happiness and the cause of happiness. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a beautiful meditation. Very expansive. And a great example of what we were talking about before, about how to cultivate the space and these positive emotions. After a meditation like that, I feel like, okay, I have a lot of energy to go do all kinds of things from the point of love, you know?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, for all of our listeners, thanks for joining us in this exploration. And like I said, you'll find links to the resources we mentioned and to Tenzin's other talks and so on in the description below the video. And until next time, I will hope that this will bless your life and give you lots of inspiration for making more space and getting in touch with those emotions inside and transmuting them to love and the positive emotions. So thank you again, Tenzin.
Thank you, Jennifer. It was really a pleasure to be with you, and it was very inspiring for me too. And I wish you also, and everyone listening, I wish you all the best on your personal journey towards healing yourself and the planet.
Thank you.